Okay, so I assume everybody can see that. So, yeah, welcome and thanks for the invite tonight. I'm looking forward to talking to you folks about my thoughts on beekeeping. I'm not really a Zoom call aficionado. I'm more of an in-person, face-to-face, and pretty informal. I like, to discuss things as they arise. You have questions. And talking to Keith before we get started here, I guess the best thing to do is put a comment in. He's going to monitor it, but I always like to, address any discussions in context when we're talking about it. So I encourage folks, if you have anything, feel free to speak up or put in the chat rather. So tonight I'm mainly going to be speaking about what I'm calling critical thinking beekeeping. But I was also asked to go a little bit deeper into on the spot queen rearing, which I will do. I've worked that into the charts here towards the end, and we'll go through that. So let's see here if I can figure out. We'll move forward here. So yeah, so my bio, it's all there. I'm not gonna go through it line by line. The way I see it, the bottom line is I'm just another beekeeper, just like all of you. I'm not here to sell you anything, nor am I here to convince you to do anything that I do. I just want to share what I've learned and try and encourage people to just take a step back and do an honest self-assessment and why the things that you do with your bees, why do you do it? You confident and understand why you're doing it, or is it something that you just read in a book, you saw it on the internet, or because that's the way everyone else does it? I think a lot of beekeepers, there's a lot of good beekeepers here tonight. Occasionally I try to sometimes feel that I'm a good beekeeper too, but I think we can all benefit from just taking a step back and trying to understand what we're doing and not just doing it because. So with that said, I just want to get us in perspective. Two quotes that I just share. One is from John Harding. Most of you probably have never heard of him. He's a beekeeper in England. For those in IBM, you'll probably understand. John is a wild duck. I consider myself a wild duck in beekeeping as well. But basically, someone who doesn't fly in formation but challenges the status quo. John's main focus is on Earth's magnetics and beekeeping, which is like, whoa, but if we have anybody out there that's a dowser or would douse a little bit or whatever, I encourage you to take a set of dowsing rods with you when you go pick up swarms and just check it out. You'll be amazed of what you see. I mean, I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with or asked the question, why is this one branch that the swarm lands on that same branch every year? So there's possibly some stuff behind that. But anyway, not to get too far off track here. John says, don't see what you have read in a book, read what you see in your beehive. So I'm a strong believer of using the bees as your mentor and seeing what they are doing and learn from them. Often too much I see beekeepers thinking they know more than the bees, and they're actually fighting with what the bees want. And it's not beneficial for either. And that leads me into the second one, which Michael Bush, I'm sure most of you have heard of, at least. I've known Michael for a couple decades now, and I credit him with he got me going back and looking at the old literature and realizing how much beekeeping information we have already learned and forgotten, and now people are rediscovering it and thinking it's something new. But Michael's famous quote is, honeybees continue to survive despite our help. And I know everyone has good intentions, but just because your intentions are good doesn't mean you're helping them. Once again, I see too many us battling with the bees and struggling with each other. So study the bees and let them be mentor. And then one more chart before we get into the meat of the presentation. Beekeeping is regional, and sometimes I think we forget about that when we're out on the internet or wherever, of how different areas and climates really do affect your beekeeping. And this is a chart that I use when I do my intro to beekeeping course, just to give perspective of the size of the US. I just superimpose it over Europe and the Middle East, and I'm not trying to align climates or anything like that, but just the mass size that you can see. It's really unreasonable to think that one particular breed of bee and one management style is going to work everywhere in the United States. So, we should always keep that in mind. And with that, I'm a northern beekeeper. My focus has been on high thermodynamics and stuff in the northern climates. You guys are in a much warmer climate. So some of the things I'm going to go through here tonight that I use as examples are probably not as important to you as they are to me, but you also have things in your climate that aren't necessarily important to me or an issue. I mean, I assume you're southern and that you have like small hive beetles can be a concern. Here in the north, small hive beetles we have them, but I don't worry about them because every winter they get knocked down and we get, I get onesie twosies here, so I don't really worry about that. But you really need to keep in mind region when you take beekeeping advice. Okay, so I don't know if I can see. Oh, any questions? I see maybe. No. Okay.
So Rob, real quick, I had someone participating ask if we could give them or give out your email address.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you know what? I should have put that out, but yeah, no, feel free to contact me. I'm always interested in speaking with people.
Okay, I will put that out on the chat.
Okay.
Okay.
Oh, and you know what I did forget was back to my disclaimer. What I wanted to talk about was yeah, I just want to let everybody know that like I said, I'm just a beekeeper like you, and I'm not here to judge anybody's beekeeping, and I'm probably going to offend some folks with some of the things I say today when I challenge what status quo, but I'm just giving you my opinion. Take it for what it's worth. Once again, just trying to get people to think about what they're doing. I know beekeeping can be, a religion, and I'll challenge some of the pretty sacred topics tonight, but I think we can all be better beekeepers if we evaluate what we're doing. And my philosophy has always been with the folks around here that are new and getting into beekeeping is I don't teach people to be beekeepers, but I help them to learn to be good beekeepers. I'll share what I do and tell them why, but I insist that they all go off and find out what works for them, but make sure they think through it and understand why they're doing it. We have too many people that just want to have bees and be given directions on what to do, and there's just too many variables that you need to be aware of. So with that, let's get into the meat of the presentation. So, I'll argue that the number one myth in beekeeping is that cold doesn't kill bees, moisture does. And I've been spending the last 30 years or so, with the hive thermodynamics, and, my immediate response to that, and I never get an answer, is, I've seen many, many open air colonies that were protected, from the weather, like the picture I have there on the right, and I've yet to see a single one survive the winter. So, it's I don't think it's reasonable to say that cold doesn't kill bees. There's to me, it's more of a lazy or poor justification for ventilation to account for the bad thermodynamics in the Langstroth hive. And, I think we all can agree that the Langstroth hive, it revolutionized beekeeping with removable frames and the bee spacing. However, it's not perfect, and the thermodynamics of the hive are its weak spot. And that's been one of my focuses, along with studying feral bees over the time. You think about it, Henry Ford revolutionized the car industry, right? Are we all still driving Model A's? Yeah, no, right? 1900 houses were uninsulated and cold. Have our homes improved in comfort over the last century? I think we can all agree, yes. And, just like we have a comfort level, so do the bees. And we often, just ignore that fact. And you look at the Langstroth hive, and it's been pretty much unchanged for the last 100 years. So I think, we can do better than that. Feral bees in a tree don't need ventilation. I've done hundreds of bee removals of feral colonies, and every one of them have sealed up every crack possibly could with propolis, except for their entrance. They don't want the ventilation. I included a picture there on the right of a screened top that was on a hive, and you can't imagine the amount of effort it has taken them to propolize that screen, and given enough time, they will fully propolize that. I mean, these are the things that a good beekeeper needs to realize when you're doing something to a hive. How are the bees reacting? Are they fighting what you're trying to do, or is it really helping them? Heat retention is much better way to deal with moisture. Warm air holds moisture. Cold air is what causes the condensation to happen. And once again, not to get too carried away with cold weather. We as humans want moisture in our houses in the winter time, so that our respiratory system doesn't get dried out and sore and cracked and stuff. And the same thing with the bees. They need a lot of moisture, especially when raising brood. Heat retention is not just about insulation, but it's also about nest size. They need a cavity that they can manage. So following on to that, if I can get the next slide to advance. Hello. Technical difficulties here. Hang on, my presentation just seemed to lock up. Okay, there we go. Following along with that, bees don't heat the hive, they only heat the cluster. I hear that quite often from folks that in the north here that don't insulate their hives and explain why they have to have so much ventilation, and it really doesn't matter because the bees only heat the cluster. It's totally violates the second law of thermodynamics, which is heat moves from hotter to colder. And the analogy I like to throw back at these folks that they don't have an answer for is, it's like saying firewood only heats the wood stove and not the room. I mean, it's ridiculous. We have heat migrates from warmer to colder, and that leads into beekeepers are led to believe that clustering is a normal phenomena. I think it was about 2015 I crossed paths with Derek Mitchell, who was another UK, not a beekeeper, actually. His wife was a beekeeper, and he's a scientist and saw the hives and really questioned it. So he's done a lot of research. His paper is listed at the bottom there. But it wasn't until I had some conversations with him and saw his results that, he calculates, bees in a normal bee tree, they don't cluster until it's minus 40 degrees outside. And I just, that just knocked me over, because I'm like thinking, there are very few places, if any, in the US that ever gets down to minus 40. So that's telling me bee trees never really clustering in the wintertime. They're active. And around where I'm at, well, I mean, the temperature is much colder, but his calculations say that in a regular Langstroth wooden hive without any protection, that when the outside temperature hits, starts dropping much below 40 degrees, the bees start getting clustering tendencies. So looking also into his research, it actually revealed that the Langstroth hive was actually a step back, that believe it or not, dung-covered skeps have about double the heat retention of a wooden Langstroth. And if you think about it, I'm sure we've all seen skeps. I've never seen a skep that required any kind of ventilation into it. They always have an entrance at the bottom, and they're completely closed, and that's because they retain the heat, and the condensations is not an issue. So survival, and I threw some pictures in here of my one of my apiaries, and the pictures don't really do it justice, but I mean, you can see even 10 frames or even in my 5 frame, the bees aren't tightly clustered. They're actually quite active and moving around all winter long. So, there's part of the survival mechanism that a lot of beekeepers think that because they survive that it's good or it's okay, and that it's normal, and that's not the case. I'm a guy of analogies. I always say to them, I challenge these folks, because homeless people survive in New York City through the winter as well, but yet none of these beekeepers that want to let their bees cluster all winter long are willing to take me up on the offer to go be homeless in New York City for the winter and see how good that is. Let's see here now. If I can get to the next chart. I'm not sure why this is not advancing very quickly. I apologize for the slowness. I'm not sure if it's Zoom's taking resources of my computer or what, but so moving on, similar fashion. Beekeepers have been taught that put your hives in the full sun and gets them going early in the morning, and it's the best thing for them. Once again, stepping back and looking at the feral bees and nature, the bee tree is the ideal situation for the colony, right? They get in the wintertime, when there's no foliage on the trees, they get the full extent of the winter sun and the radiated heat that they can get from the sun during the day. But yet in summertime, when the leaves are all out, they have the benefit of the canopy, and basically directly shields them from sunlight, pretty much after early morning, 9-10 o'clock, and they're in shade the rest of the day. I'm sure we're all aware, you see that hives in direct sun tend to have excessive bearding to regulate the temperature in the hive. And of course, beekeepers have been trained that bearding is it's a sign of swarming, or it's a sign of bees being lazy, and if they weren't hanging on the front of the hive, they could be out collecting nectar. So we compensate for that by providing ventilation. But the question is ventilation really helpful, or are we fighting the bees? And another book that I would recommend, an older book, it's very short. In fact, it's available free online, PDFs and stuff, is Ed Clark. I think he was in Virginia, was a beekeeper. He wrote a book, Constructive Beekeeping, talking about heat retention stuff of the hive. In fact, he designed his own hive that allowed condensation to happen on the outside of the top cover, so the bees could still harvest the water for winter for their brood rearing. But he goes through the numbers, calculating, like I said, using Virginia temperatures, the average humidity and temperatures, and the amount of nectar they have to bring in to reduce down to, and he walks through all those numbers in the book, and he shows that there's no way that the bees can rely on evaporation to dry their honey all the way. That in reality, bees rely a lot on condensation in the summer to dry out their honey. And the nighttime temperature deltas and the use of propolis to line the inside exterior parts of the hive allows for condensation to happen, and then they can either use that moisture for their brood, or if there is an excess, it's much easier for them to just cart it out than to deal with having to wait on ventilation. In fact, I think in his book, he quotes that if they were to rely on ventilation only, we would see fog of moisture coming out of the entrance of their hive, if it was even possible. Let's see. I guess I need to try and advance the slide like halfway through here. I guess we're waiting. Any questions at this point?
No, there's no questions on chat at this point, unless somebody wants to bring something up real quick. So as far as advancing the slides, I know that if you're using dual monitors with the Zoom output on one monitor, it always lags a little bit for propagation delay, I would assume. So are you seeing it on your screen?
Yeah.
That you're,
It's not dancing on either for some reason. I mean, it's not hung because the timer's still running, but I've tried to click the arrow. I've tried arrow keys.
well, left click your mouse on your presentation and see if that'll advance it.
Yeah, no, yeah, no, that's not, seems to be working here. I don't know why. There we go.
That's strange. Okay.
Yeah, it is. So, yeah, moving on to integrated pest management or IPM. Once again, I'm not, I know a lot of folks use it. I use it to some extent. I'm not trying to say it's a bad thing. It's more of, is it effective, right? I mean, I know it works to some extent, but how effective is it? Is it good, or is it just good enough? Type deal. Personally, I've changed my view on Varroa within the last 2 years. To me, it's no longer about controlling mites, but it's more about eradicating them. And when I say that, I've seen tremendous, well, I shouldn't say tremendous. I've seen better winter results when I've gone down the method of eradicating and trying to eliminate them completely versus, trying to get it down to, 1 per 100 or whatever, your goal is. I mean, typically in our area, the normal, it ranges from 40% losses to, on the good side, 20%, 10, I say I average around 15% losses. And 2 years ago when I went to, the eradication versus the control, I still think it's a fluke, but we'll see. It was the first year ever that I didn't lose a single hive through the winter. This year will be the real determiner to see if it's really the case. But I think, and I should say, I'm not, not bragging or how great a beekeeper I am, because the reason I went that route is the year before, 3 years ago, I was on the normal, trying to control Varroa, doing my oxalic treatments, once a week for 5 weeks. And I didn't see high Varroa counts. I didn't do any real shakes or anything through the summer, but just the going through, breaking off supers and coming across open drone brood, and inspecting, or just observing bees. I didn't see any substantial amounts of Varroa through the whole year, so I didn't think I had a problem. I did the normal treatment, and that winter I lost 75% of my hives. So that's when I dug in a little bit deeper and talked to some other beekeepers that have already gone to, the eradication versus the control, and that's what made my decision to go that route. So anyway, back to the topic. It comes down to, is it good or is it good enough? And then the stress versus reward. And another thing that I struggle with is, a lot of things, as an engineer, a lot of things look good on paper, but in reality, that's not the case. I've been a strong proponent against screen bottom boards for many, many years now. I used them way back when. And not that they're necessarily a bad thing. I think people take too much faith in them. It sounds great on paper that the mites fall off the bees, they go through the screen and they can't get back up. But there's a big assumption that everyone makes, and yet to find any resource or any research or anything that makes me feel like it's meaningful is the fall off of mites off of bees, is it significant? Or if only 1% of mites are falling off bees, then is the screen bottom board really doing much? Or is it just mites that are dying or getting old that are falling off the bees, and no one can really demonstrate or show that mites fall off bees on a regular basis. And, that's a big assumption when you think screen bottom boards are your protection against Varroa. I've also seen studies that show that screen bottom boards allow the brood nest to be cooler and drier, which is more advantageous to the mites reproduction than it is to bee to bees raising brood. I mean, typical Langstroth hive with the standard entrance, you never see them raising brood on the bottom of the lower brood box, near the entrance. Always keep the brood away from there. So, once again, it's more about really thinking through these methods, and are they really doing what you think they're doing? Drone comb, another great example. I mean, it definitely is effective, but it's also very timely. And if you miss that timing window, it's a ticking Varroa time bomb. If you're a day late and all those mites that just reproduce in those drone cells, they start hatching out, you just, made your hive much worse than if you had not done the drone comb. So yeah, it works, but it's dangerous. And if you're like me, life throws you curveballs all the time. And as much as I want to be in an apiary on a certain day, it doesn't always happen. So, just be careful. I'm using that. I haven't seen it much lately, but another popular one a while back was, putting a screen on top of the hive and putting a pound or two or powdered sugar on top, and, letting that, rain through the hive and supposedly cause the mites to come off of the bees. And then obviously down through the bottom screen bottom board. To me, that is just so stressful on the hive. It just sets them back for days as they try to clean and get things back in order. And any of the powdered sugar that got on some brood kills the brood, and such. That's another one where I think the medication, the medicine is more dangerous than the sickness. Brood breaks, that's definitely a good method as well. We'll talk more about that later when we get into the queen rearing. A lot of thought is the feral colonies that are surviving through Varroa is due to the brood breaks. I mean, the feral colonies are swarming and doing their natural brood breaks, and that's the reason behind that. And if you go through the method of how it's supposed to work, is that the mites just have nowhere to go, and then the first brood that's of the 6, 7, or 8 days old, when they want to jump in before it's capped, that comes available, they just all pounce on that brood and get sealed in there. And then whether you believe it's the hemophil, the bee blood, or the latest that they think it might be, they're eating the fat body, the liver-like organ, whatever it is. Basically, there's not enough in one larvae to feed all those mites, and they basically starve to death. And I have included a picture here of this was of example of one of the persons in my bee group that was doing the brood breaks. We'll talk about more when I get into OTS. And this was after his new queen came back online, and you can see, I mean, I count there's at least a dozen mites that were in that one cell. So if that's the case and it's working, it's definitely a viable option to help reduce your Varroa. And most of the time, although integrated pest management, it's less intrusive. A lot of people seem to think it's a more natural approach, which I should have clicked. Let me see, which leads to the next slide. Okay, let's try that. So natural is another, I'm sorry, question?
Yeah, I got a question. Please explain what your eradicating practices are.
Yeah, right now I am treating, and you're gonna see you're gonna think it's crazy. I treat on a 3-day. I treat oxalic acid vapor on a 3-day rotation for a month. and well, 3 to 4 days, because 3 days doesn't fit equally into a week. So I do it on a 3 and 4 day. I do it twice a week for an entire month, because some of the research has shown now that an oxalic acid treatment is only effective for like 3 days. And so if you're only treating once a week, you got those other 4 days where any mite that hatches out, because oxalic acid doesn't affect mites that are in, under cappings that hatch out. They have 4 days to get back under cappings before your next treatment. And it's estimated that a mite spends about 30 hours between a hatch and back being capped. So, there's a lot of 30-hour windows in 4 days. And I've seen numbers as high as, you might only be getting, if you're treating on a weekly schedule with Varroa, you might only be getting 40% of the total mites in the hive. So that's why I've gone to the 3 and 4 day treatment over, a whole month to overlap the honeybee breeding cycle, which kind of overlaps 2 breeding cycles of the mites. So, that's more of totally eliminating the mites from the hive versus allowing them to, seek cover before the next treatment.
So follow-up question is, what is your dosage of oxalic acid per treatment?
Yeah, that's another good question. I actually use about 4 grams per double deep. The recent research I've shown says you can use up to 6, but and I use 4 because I do I don't block these in like the normal method prescribes, blocking the entrance and for 10-15 minutes or whatever. I just have too many hives to do that, and I just don't really have a good picture. I mean, Jim mentioned my bottom boards are a vertical entrance, which is hard to describe, but basically I just have a hole in the back of my hives. I vaporize, and it basically, with a vertical entrance, my hive without ventilation, is like a sealed bell jar. So by the time I get, vapor coming out down through the bottom entrance, the hive is completely engulfed inside, and it doesn't, if you have hives with ventilation, the vapors can come right out the top. Mine actually, they'll slowly come out the entrance, but it takes a while. So that's why I don't, I get away with using 4, and I don't worry about what escapes out the entrance. And I just, bang down the line, 2 minutes per hive, and be done with it.
So
But
one last follow-up on this, and then we'll move on. How often per year do you do this 3 and 4 day treatment?
just once. I do it in the month of August.
Okay.
I'm also working on some other oxalic acid treatment studies that not that I'm not at liberty to talk about it. It's too early to tell people, get people excited or have them go off and try it. The results look promising. And that is more of a liquid treatment once every 3 weeks. But I probably shouldn't even said that much, get people interested. But yeah, so there's other things coming, and I'm sure folks are aware that there's studies with oxalic acid strips going on as well. I have not seen the results of that. I know Jennifer Berry and company were doing some stuff, but I just haven't seen anything on that, because I'll be honest with you, vaporizing is something that I don't, for my own health, I don't like doing, and I'm trying to get away from it, because even with, I use a full face respirator. This year I even went to a Tyvek suit, gloves. You can't avoid it, and I feel it every year when I go through my treatment, and it's not a good thing for us. And everybody says, well, how do the bees deal with it? It's amazing to me how I mean, I've tried a lot of Varroa treatments through the years, and oxalic acid is the one that is like least impactful to them. I mean, you treat them, and by the time I get down my row of hives, and the first hive is like back to normal, like nothing ever happened. Any other treatment seems to be much more, you know, harsher on them. And I have also done, not to keep dragging on this, but I've also done with my 4-gram treatments. I've gone up to 2 months on a couple hives just to see, to see, because the concern is using much that often is any impacts on the queens. And once again, I have not seen any impact to my queens that I've not seen any substantial amount of queen failure, and the queen failure that I have seen has I can't tie it to the oxalic acid, because hives that I have done these, extended experiments on all came through the next winter fine, queen right, and such. So to me, oxalic acid is the safest for the bees that I've been able to come across.
Okay, so let's move on, please.
Okay, sorry about that. Get sidetracked. So natural is another pet peeve of mine, I'll say. I just threw this chart in here, of what Merriam-Webster dictionary says about natural, and I've highlighted a few that I think apply to beekeeping per se, and occurring in conformity with the ordinary course of nature, growing without human care, or having a form or appearance found in nature. Right. So with that definition, I'm going to go out on a limb and say there's nothing natural about beekeeping. Anything we do is not natural to the bees, right? A bee tree never gets opened, allowing its heat and scent to escape, and scent of a nest is something that no one ever talks about anymore. But yet, if you go back and look at some of these older books and stuff, especially the Warre book, he talks extensively about scent retention, and we don't ever talk about it, right? I don't have an opinion one way or the other that it's important or not, but it's just another thing that we just ignore. Bee trees never get the comb exposed to light. They never get the comb removed or rearranged. They're never moved. All the things that we do commonly as beekeepers never happen to a feral colony in a tree. The other thing that, going down the natural line is primitive does not mean natural. I see a lot of folks getting into beekeeping, and they want to go to a top bar hive because it's more primitive. They think it's more natural. And in reality, I'll argue that a Langstroth hive is more natural, because bees work in a vertical configuration, not in a horizontal. And I got a picture here on the right from Tom Seeley's The Nest of the Honeybee research that he did, and not to backtrack, but a lot of the Derek Mitchell work that he did was based upon what Seeley defined as a typical bee tree from all his research that he did in the Arnott Forest up near Cornell. But basically, when a swarm moves into a tree cavity, they start at the top and they draw their comb, and the queen starts laying, because they got to get brood going, because their lifespan is running out and they got to repopulate. So they keep building comb. She keeps laying. And then as the brood hatches out, they're bringing in nectar. They backfill from the top, and they basically keep drawing comb, and they drive that brood nest, down through the summer. Come fall, what brood nest is left is at the bottom. Above them is all honey. As the winter progresses, they slowly start moving up, consuming honey. And as they're moving, the heat that the cluster's giving off is preheating the honey they're coming up on. And with the insulated value of a tree, they're pretty much, they don't need a warm day to move to more storage. I mean, they've got that natural progression, and they can just, as long as they don't run out of honey, they can just keep moving up and preheating and moving up and get through the winter. And the spring, it just starts all over, and they start driving back down. Where, especially here in the north, with the really cold weather. Top bar hives, first of all, if they're not insulated, the bees are going to cluster. The cluster can't break when it's extremely cold to move to the next frame horizontally. And it's just, it's just, they're just putting the bees in a situation that's not natural to them and not advantageous to them as well. So we have to, when we do things, we have to really understand is because bees can do it doesn't mean it's common. I mean, Jay Smith, who was one of the, probably the better queen rearers of all time, he says bees do the very best they can under existing circumstances. And we see that. I've already talked about the winter clustering. They do it. It's a survival mechanism. It's not that it's natural to them. And the other one that, we'll dig into here now is emergency queens. Beekeepers think emergency queens just happen all the time. And I'll argue in nature, they very, very rarely happen. It's common nature for people to just want to do walk away splits where they just take their hive, split it in two, and the queen ends up in one half and the other half makes a queen from a worker egg, and voila, they have two hives now. That's quite common. I can remember as a kid working with my dad, and this is, back in the 70s, we didn't have all the issues we have now keeping bees with varroa mites and the viruses and, nosema and all the stuff that we have imported from other countries to affect our bees, right? I mean, back then, the only thing we had was American foul brood, and, and we actually proactively treated with terramycin to prevent American foul brood. And I don't know anybody these days that really even worries about American foul brood. You hear from here or there, but no one's out that's their big concern. So things were much easier back then on the bees. And it was quite common back then to use a process which was, affectionately known as yard trashing. Basically going in, if you had a yard of 10 hives and you wanted 20 hives, you just put 20 bottom boards and you take your 10 hives and you just split the resources all between the 20 hives, mixing, matching, not worrying about if you had queen or brood from what frame or what hive. You just tried to make 20 balanced boxes of brood and resources from what you started with. And you relied on the bees to make, emergency queens to bring things back online. But the environment and life back then was much easier on the bees, and they could overcome situations like that. You tried that now, and you're going to have a nightmare on your hands.
A quick question, Rob.
Yes.
If bees move vertically, do laying hives work against their natural tendency?
She's saying long.
Yeah.
Long layings.
Yeah. I mean, even I'll argue that a 10 frame Langstroth box is really too big. I would say ideally, I have some folks in my bee group that use 6 frame polystyrene hives, and they go 3, 4, 5 high with them. To me, it's more typical of a bee tree, but it becomes a nightmare as a beekeeper to deal with these high towers. 10 frames is definitely too big. I'd be comfortable with 8. You can't get polystyrene boxes in 8, so I use 10. But long Langstroths are just as bad as a top bar hive as well. Yeah, I guess they're just as bad. I mean, the bees still would have to, if they're clustered, they still can't get to resources without having to break cluster. Now, once again, I got to say, it's climate dependent. Top bar hives work great in tropical areas or warm areas where they don't have extended cold. So, keep that in mind. If your area, if you don't have, extended days, of cold weather, then it's perfectly fine. I know some folks like the long Langstroths because of the height and weight and issues and stuff like that. Sometimes you have to compromise what the beekeeper can do, or physically or with the bees, and you can make the best of it. So I'm not trying to badmouth any way anybody wants to keep bees, but just keep in mind what you're doing, and you need to compensate if you can, for what you're taking away from them in their natural environment. So let's see here. We can go to the next. Okay. So emergency queens. Well, I guess queens in general, queen cells. Um, Swarm cells, are the best you're gonna get. Optimal conditions. There's enough resources coming in. It's reared out of they're rearing them out of desire and not a need. It's a strong hive that wants to procreate and create another colony. So, as a sustainable beekeeper, swarm cells are your friend. If your timing is good and you can do your increases and become sustainable just using swarm cells and not have to worry about doing any kind of queen rearing. With that said, I think we've all experienced that swarm season comes pretty quick and not always at the same time in life, and sometimes you just don't catch them in the right time frame. So it's always good to have a backup plan to raise queens. Supersedure, it is somewhat more natural for the bees, usually replacing a failing or aging queen. I'm not a fan of supersedure queens, even though it's commonly used, I think, for swarms. After they swarm and get established, they will supersede the old queen to get a new queen. That is, part of nature. And, it leads to some questions that I don't have answers to is it possible that when they slim the queen down and stop her from laying so that she can fly, is that affecting the long-term quality of her laying down the road? I don't know. Is that why they supersede her? And, on the same thought it's common to see package bees supersede in their first year. Is that, tied into there as well? I don't have these answers, but these are just things that as a beekeeper, be observant and question things, and not just do things because that's the way it is. Supersedure cells are also done when a failing queen. I've actually had hives that I've seen repetitive supersedure after supersedure after supersedure, as many as 3 or 4 times in one season if I let them. And to me, I can only deduce that it was a issue with the queen that was genetically sent her offsprings through her eggs, and that's why they just kept superseding. I do know that I think it's Clarence Farrer. He was a USDA. He led the beekeeping laboratories in the 50s. He said that a poor queen can outperform a poor queen in ideal conditions can outperform a quality queen in poor conditions. And when I read that, it reminded me that I tell folks around here that, especially folks that just like to do even emergency queens, poor queens look fantastic in the summertime when everything is ideal. It's been my experience that soon as the weather starts turning to fall, that's when they start failing, and you end up with queenless colonies. And it's the worst time of the year to have a queenless colony, when you've combined, or you've got all your resources ready for winter. Now you have a colony without a queen and nothing you can do. So that's why I try to stay away from supersedure queens. Now I know I have friends in down south that swear by them, and the winters are much milder, and they seem to do fine. Just looking at the nature aspects of it and the things, quality queen is much more important, I think, in the north as far as survival for the winter than in the southern climates that aren't so harsh. Because like I said, we see these supersedure queens up here in the summertime when conditions are nice, doing fantastic, and then soon as things start turning, is they start dying, or being replaced really quickly. And then the last of all is the emergency queen, and that's just once again, it's a last ditch effort for the colony to survive. They'll do anything they can do to survive. We often see, especially the folks that do the walkaway splits and stuff, will say that bees will always use the right aged larvae, and even a lot of the famous beekeepers, CC Miller and all them, say they've never seen. Even Jay Smith says I've never seen them use an older larvae, with the caveat when the correct aged larvae is available. Because my always come back to all that is they'll never use a too old larvae, but yet you take a laying worker colony. Why are those they're not smart enough to realize that taking an unfertilized egg and trying to make a queen out of it's not going to work. And you'll see that all the time with a laying working colony. They'll try to make queen cells out of an unfertilized egg, but yet you're telling me they won't use an egg that's too old that is fertilized. So there's a lot of things that we take for granted and don't necessarily hold water. So with an emergency queen, they need to somehow figure out how to transition that larvae from a horizontal configuration to the vertical queen configuration. Now, if you do nothing and they got to do this emergency from a worker cell, they tend to, I forget Jay Smith, I think he says they water down the royal jelly so they can float the larvae out to get into the vertical configuration. Well, they're doing that. They're affecting the quality of the food. And Lawrence Farrell also, in his papers and research, he states that the queen larva increases 1,500 times in weight in the 5 days from hatching to pupation. The number seems like really super large to me. But even if it's 100 times, right? It's still, they got to grow a tremendous amount in a short period of time. I put a picture on the right there of a 1 day old larvae, and then the 5 day old larvae, and that it is a tremendous amount. And I've also seen studies that say queen cell, that the larvae is getting fed every 4 to 8 seconds, right? Because it's incredible how much they got to grow in that short period of time. So the one thing that we want to try to do is not impact that larval nutrition during that peak critical time of development of the queen. And all of our queen rearing methods rely to some extent on that emergency instinct. They're queenless. They need to get a queen. But as novice beekeepers, I think we need to take steps to minimize that nutrition impact, whether it's us or the bees. We should do whatever we can not to require moving that larvae. Now, if you're a Dave Mitska that's putting out thousands of queen cells a day, and if anybody's ever been there or saw, as fast as they can dip that grafting rod in the cell and boom, boom. I mean, they're just moving those larvae like crazy. If you're producing hundreds or thousands of queens, then obviously grafting is the most efficient way to do it. But for the normal backyard person, novice person that's just trying to be self-sustaining, there's no need to want or have to do grafting. I shouldn't say want, because let's face it, saying you graft queens is sexy. Everybody wants to say, oh yeah, I graft queens, right? But to do the best for the bees, you don't want to have to move that larvae. Okay, let's see here now. So let's get into the queen rearing stuff now. From a sustainable beekeeping standpoint, you want to be able to raise your own queens. And like I said, we want to focus on the non-grafting methods, and there's tons of them out there. I've done most of these at one point or another. The NICOT, the Genter, the kits where you get the plastic cups and they go into a special box that you mount into a frame, and the queen lays in them just like they would a normal worker cell. And then after they hatch, you pull the plugs and you mount them in the configuration, and and then they make a queen cell out of it. Once again, on paper, it looks fantastic. When it works correctly, it's great. There's just so many variables and snafus that can happen along the way, between not having the cells clean enough for her to lay into them, or you move them before the egg hatches into a larvae, and then the bees just clean it out anyway, or the bees put nectar in the cells you want her to lay in. If you have the process down to a science, I say you're still going to have a 25% failure rate of getting it to work correctly. And it's expense for the kit. It's special equipment, just like most of the stuff requires additional equipment. Cell punches, you take a shell casing from a rifle or something, and you just basically punch out a cell and then mount it. Works as well. The Hopkins method, take the worker frame and just put it horizontally on the top bars with a spacer, let them draw down. The Alley or J. Smith method of basically taking the worker comb and cutting, the mid planes of the cells and making strips and mounting them. It all works. A lot of those require planning, extra steps, extra equipment. They're a good try, and if that's what you want to do, it's fine. It works. But what I've found, and what I've and help all my new beekeepers learn to do is the OTS, the on the spot queen rearing. Eldest Cohen, another guy that I believe his profession was he was a barber, not an academic scholar in beekeeping and stuff, but one of these guys that wants to understand what's going on with bees and how they work, and did his research with the old, and he came up with this notching, and basically it's knocking the bottom of the cells out and allowing them to raise their queen cells right in the worker brood on your common frames. It's easily done by any beekeeper, whether it's the first time is always an experience, for anything you do, but whether you do it once every 3 years or whatever, once you've done it, it's pretty simple, and it's not like grafting where, you need to practice and keep that skill honed. So any beekeeper can do it, and they don't need any special equipment to do it, or to even have to prepare. You can be in a hive and realize, hey, this hive, it's time to make a split or whatever, and you can start your OTS process right there on the spot. So let's see here. So I have to say these pictures on the right are from Mel's website. I did not have any good pictures like he does. But the basic principle is, if you look on the bottom left, is you want to just knock the bottom third of the cell out and go to the top. You can see once you do that, you've exposed the larvae. And the key is you want to go all the way to the foundation or the midplane. If you leave any remnants of the bottom of the cell, then either A, they're going to not take it as a queen cell and fix it, or they're still going to have to float that larvae out a little bit. So with this method, they can start right from there and make the queen cell. Although it's not totally vertical, it's vertical enough that they don't have to float the larvae, and the larvae can continue to eat the royal jelly and not have to worry about pulling away from it. The middle picture there shows some cells that have been depleted. One of the drawbacks with the OTS is you'll get joined queen cells. If that, it doesn't really bother me. If that is a concern, you can always, like all the other methods that I talked about before that don't require moving the larvae. A lot of those that go in and they'll destroy every other larvae or such. You could definitely do that here as well. But the nice thing about the notching is you can do multiple frames with brood in a hive, and you can just take the frames and make your nukes with the frames, or move the frame to a mating nuke or whatever to get your queens. I will say the thing that amazed me the most about this was, and I would suggest if anybody does try this, I actually suggest everybody does try it at least once. Mark the top of your frame where you made your notching, because if they decide they're not going to raise queens, it was amazing to me how they repair the damage you've done to the point where you can't even see where you had done it. So many times I'll go in, there's like, did I not, was this the frame I notched? Well, no, I guess not. And so I got into the habit of marking the frame and the general location on the top bar so that I know when I go in. I mean, if you look at the middle picture where the queen cells are, you don't see any damage around them of the cells. They've repaired all the additional cells that were knocked down. The key to this is obviously just like any kind of queen rearing, you want very young larvae. I think Mel says up to 36 hours. They do claim you can also knock eggs. I've had no success with that. So I always try to find the youngest larvae that I can. And, anytime you see the royal jelly shininess and the larvae's kind of small, that's usually good if you can't see it. What you don't want, as I don't have a picture, is you don't want when that larvae is in that tight C. U is okay. When it starts crawling into that C configuration, that larvae is too old. And I should say, I mean, Mel, you don't need any special tools or anything. He recommends, or he demonstrates with a normal hive tool. I have found, I think it's called a felt knife, a roofer's felt knife. I put a picture here on the left. Nowadays they're probably about $10, but I find they work fantastic because they're sharper than a hive tool, especially if you have an older comb that's had a lot of brood in it and a lot of cocoons left behind. That tool makes it really nice to be able to cut clean. I mean, Mel's pictures here are, obviously the ideal pictures. You'll find that your cuts will be, depending on the age of the comb, will be a little bit more ragged and such, but the process is still the same. I will put a little plug in here for Mel's book. He's done a tremendous amount of work in his book is more than just queen rearing. It's a wealth of knowledge of not only self-sustaining, but he walks through, how you can grow your apiary, how he does a lot of nuke sales. He has a whole section on controlling mites through brood breaks. And that picture that I showed previously with the dozen or more mites, that was the outcome of one of my members here doing OTS. He also walks through if your priority is honey production, how you can do OTS in the spring and still build back up and have a honey producing hive instead of a bee producing hive. His general principle is I can briefly say, you go in this in the spring, you got your strong healthy hive. You basically take the laying queen and 2 frames of brood and a little extra bee, put them in a nuke, go in the same yard, not a big deal. And then you take that remaining hive, what's left behind, and that's your cell builder. And you go in there. If you have 8 frames of brood, you can notch all 8 frames. And then you can decide. He walks through all the different options. I mean, you can make eight nukes out of that. You can just take the frames, make queens out of it, and build back up. You can reunite. He goes through all the incantations of what you want to do. But he basically says if everybody used OTS, we could quadruple the number of hives in one season. So he also talks a lot about timing, another thing that I didn't get in covering here today, because but we fail to take the natural seasons into consideration, specifically the solstices, right? The winter solstice is the turning point where the days start getting longer, and that keys our bees to start getting ready to ramp up brood production for spring. Likewise, the summer solstice is when the days start to get shorter, and that's when your laying queens will start slowing down. Mel's research has shown if a queen is mated after the summer solstice, they will continue to raise substantial amounts of brood right up to the fall versus winding down. So yeah, I don't know. I mean, I've talked to him once or twice, but I have no financial gains from you buying his book or anything else. But I would recommend it as a resource if anybody's really interested. Oh, and one thing I forgot to mention, if I go back here, this talk about sustainable beekeeping. This is I put these pictures in here. This is talking about raising quality queens, and you can do it yourself. This is a 3-year-old queen, and that's her brood pattern. After 3 years, in one of my apiaries. And in case anybody's observant and say, wait, there's 2 different colors paint on that queen. And that's usually a sign of some hokiness going on in somebody. But I'll tell you, my method is that was a blue year queen. And when I select them that I want to use her to raise additional queens off of, I then put a pink, I overwrite her color with pink. So the following year I can keep track of, you always make these decisions on what queens you think are your good queens. And you want to propagate through your apiary. And you always wonder, well, was it really a good queen? So that's how I see, if my selections were good or not. The following year, if I still have pink queens, I'm like, well, that's cool, because the queens I made from her, she's still good. So that's the double color on her, if anybody was observant and saw that. But just an example that backyard beekeepers can make tremendous quality queens, and it's you put your mind to it, it's not that hard. And I think that was it. And I'll just close with the 2 quotes again. Once again, don't see what you've read in a book, read what you see in your hive, and don't fight your bees. Honeybees continue to survive despite our help. So I don't know if there's any questions, comments.
So there's no questions on chat. So maybe we can just open it up to people jumping in and asking questions. If it gets too contentious, we may have to revert back to chat. So any questions out there?
Uh-oh, I hope I didn't put everybody to sleep.
Oh, no.
No, that was a great talk.
So I'm going to ask a question. When we were talking about the long Langstroth hive and the thermodynamics, the bees moving up as natural tendency, the Warre hive has a square footprint versus the Lang, which is a rectangular. Any experience with that style?
Yeah, I've kept some some Warre hives through the years, and it's another, if folks aren't familiar with Warre, his book Beekeeping for All is freely available in PDF form. It's a good read. He talks a lot about things that obviously he learned back then we've forgotten about. I ideally, and in fact, people that do want to keep top bar hives, I recommend the Warre is the only one that I would. Let me reframe that. In the northern environments or cold environments, the Warre is the only top bar hive that I would ever consider, because of its vertical nature. I mean, the more we can, I guess the bottom point, the point of your question, I do believe the Langstroth frames are too big, depth wise, but with that said, there is a convenience to have standardized equipment, and you have to weigh those options, right? I mean, that's why I'm not a fan. I don't think 10 frame Langstroths is the correct size. I think that the frame, but I still use 10 frame Langstroths, and I manage, around that. It might not be ideal, but I deal with it in other ways. I don't think it's sufficient enough to go off and try and, you'll find beekeepers out there with their own equipment design and stuff. And it's just the nightmares of dealing with that, and the issues you have, outweigh any benefits of the minor modifications that you're making to a Langstroth. if that makes sense. I mean,
It does. It does.
I
Okay,
mean,
so
I'm sorry, go ahead.
no, go ahead.
No, I was gonna say I have people that that want to do all mediums, and for a while, and they used to struggle just to buy a nuke because I mean now you have some folks that will sell medium nukes and stuff, but just the convenience of being able to get resources and supplies of a standard form is so valuable. I don't find the creating the difference you would gain by creating something different worthwhile.
Okay, so we got looks like 3 questions on chat. What is your best method to offer bees food over winter when the honey stores are low?
Yeah, I mean, once again, I'll speak for my climate. I do not feed any liquid after October 1st. I want them to be able to process and get it stored away. Up until, I'll say September timeframe, if I see a hive that's late, I will feed them as fast as they can take it. At this point in time, I don't want I'll feed them a gallon a day if they'll take it. I've tried all different kinds of feeders, and a lot of stuff is, I think, designed just to make money for folks, and I've wanted to fall in love with some of these things, and ultimately I'm back to what my dad used 30, 40 years ago. Friction. I use friction tile. Well, metal paint cans. I mean, back then, honey used to buy able to buy 5 pounds of honey in a tin. So they were smaller than a gallon, but that's what we use. What you used, and I'm back to that as I put an empty brood box over the top of the. I don't run intercovers, so I put the feeder right on top of the top bars. Put an empty box around it, and I put my cover on, and I can fit up to 4 gallons in there at a time. I mean, I've tried, the hive top feeders. You got ant issues. You got, if they don't eat it all, you got issues. How do you get in with the metal gallon cans? I can take them in and take them out. So I don't say force feed. I feed them quantities of syrup in September if they need it, and they'll take it. After October, I try to have everything set, by October 1st. Then I will start going in, and normally the bees don't, once they start winding down on their brood, they really don't eat a lot of their resources through the first half of the winter. That's another thing, we struggle with here in the North is folks will, especially new beekeepers, will go out and, they'll monitor their hive through November, December. It's, they still got 90% of the resources left. I mean, they're good to go. And then come January, they got to crank the brood area temperature up, and they really start, getting into the, consuming the resources. And then, come March, they're out of food and start starving. So I usually start, depending on the weather, sometimes the end of December, but usually January, I'll try to go in once a month, and, heft the hives, and anything that's a little light, I will feed sugar candy, basically just, sugar boiled down into a block, and I will supplement them with that if needed, because moisture is definitely an issue here in the North with the cold weather.
Okay, so there's a couple questions here that might put you on a bit of a spot, given that your geography is a little different, your weather's a little different. It talks about insulation. Do you insulate, and how? Figured.
I all my bees are kept in polystyrene hives year round. Let me see if I can go back a slide to that winter photo. I do I don't use this. Well, here's a summer picture, but you can see the bottom 2 boxes are polystyrene. And I do run wooden honey supers, because I'm not so much worried about the insulation value in the summertime. That is a polystyrene top. The hive to the right that's not bearding, it's hard to see, but my entrances are 3 inches, and the bees go in that, but then they got to go up to get into the hive. So that's my own design bottom board, and it was more of a experiment that I was doing. I use BMAX polystyrene hives. They've been around for a long time. Once again, I've tried all the Paradise and all the other the license, all the other brands that have come on the market that all have these super, newfangled features and everything else. And as much as I want to be, in love with this stuff, I've found that the BMAX is the most standardized with Langstroth equipment. The bee spacing is correct, and they just work the best. So I've basically stayed with the BMAX stuff. They changed their bottom boards probably, I don't know, almost 10 years ago, and I hate their new bottom boards, so I don't use them. And that's what drove me to create my own. And it just, through trial and error, I've come up with this design that, has added bonuses, like I wanted something that creates that bell jar effect, that you don't get the wind blowing into the brood, into the nest itself. That's where the vertical entrance comes in handy. But what I also found out is it's tremendous on robbing prevention as well, because in a normal situation with a normal Langstroth, the robber bees just, they just kamikaze right through the entrance. They just want to fly right in past the guard bees. Well, with my entrance, they can't do that. They got to fly in and then they come up. And once again, just like, warfare, the guy on the higher ground has a better chance. So these robber bees have to come in, stop, and then try to come up, and the defending bees are higher. So that, it's just an added benefit that I found out after the fact. But let me go back. I'm getting sidetracked from your question. Yeah. So what I do is I run the polystyrene boxes all year, my own wooden bottom board that has reflectix on the bottom, but I'm not really too much worried about the bottom because heat rises. The bees are all up, with the vertical entrance. There's no wind blowing in. I do run a 2-inch, what I call a shim, which you can see the silver around. I run a 2-inch polystyrene shim, and that was another, I'll say dumb luck discovery. When I first started going down this route, I was concerned that One Deep wouldn't be sufficient resources for them for the winter, and that I'd have to feed them. And the last thing I want to do is have to feed bees and have no real good way to do it. So I put these 2-inch shims on them that in case I had to feed, I could. And it turns out that I do feed some of the hives, but in most part, my bees use like 30% less winter stores than my peers here running wooden Langstroths. But the bees love to congregate in that space, as you can see. I mean, and so I still run the shims just to give them that space, because they seem to do so well being able to congregate like that. And then I put a 2-inch polystyrene board on top of that, and then the polystyrene cover, because my principle is I want the highest insulation value on the top, because that's where the heat rises to. And that's the last place, if condensation does happen, that I want, to drip down on the bees. If I do get, I try to size the box so that it's, pretty full of bees for the winter time. Some hives I do have to go in 2 deeps because I just have too many bees to knock them down to a hive. And occasionally I'll get one of those super high quantity bees that all of a sudden comes wintertime and decides, we're getting rid of 80% of our population. So occasionally I do get a double deep that doesn't have a large quantity of bees in it. And, the bottom box will be cooler, and, you get some condensation down there. But, so that's my insulation, process. And the 5-frame nukes, I use the BMAX polystyrene, and I also use a 2-inch. Oh, I'm using my arrow here, but you can't see it. You see my arrow now, maybe?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, I was on the wrong screen. I do use a 2-inch polystyrene shim on them, and you can see here I'm feeding the nuke a sugar a sugar cake, I just, I pour the hot into either paper bowls, or now I'm actually using like the metal takeout trays that you get at a restaurant. And I just peel it off, and I can make a bunch of them, and carry them in a carrier, and I can just peel it off and put it in there to feed them.
Okay, got a couple of questions related to Varroa. Do you have trouble with mite bombs in late fall? And then second, what type of oxalic acid vape tool do you use with your vertical entrance?
What I do is, I actually, in my bottom board, I have a little hole that I drill in the back above the floor. The floor is about a half inch down from that 3-inch bottom board, and the rest is all empty space, allowing for the vertical entrance. So the floor is pretty close to the top of the bottom board, but I do have enough space in that 3/8 or 3/4 inch lip to draw a hole where I put my vaporizer in from the back. I have been using I think it's what the Jono's Pro Vape, not the Pro Vape, Easy Vape. I have the Pro Vape is big money, and to be honest, the Jono's actually I think works better. It's a little less. I shouldn't say a little less. It's a lot less robust as far as being able to abuse it. But as far as performance, puts out a ton of vapor, and the caps aren't as nice as the Pro Vape, but the price difference and the performance of the Jono's Easy Vape, is what I use nowadays. As far as mite bombs, I think a lot of us, I mean, I don't do a lot of washes. Washes can be very misleading. Well, first of all, I'll admit I'm lazy, and it takes time and effort to do that. But I justify that in washes can be very misleading at times, depending on where you take your bees from within the hive. You could get mites, you could not get mites. If anybody does run bottom, screen bottom boards, I do have the original BMAX bottom boards had a nice tray, and screen it. So I do run a couple of them. I usually run one of them in each of my apiaries just to keep an eye. And if anybody does do, sticky boards or whatever, you'll notice that you'll get spots of heavy mites and then light mites. Well, that corresponds to, what's above. So what's above where you take your washes from can be very well affected. If you take multiple washes from the same hive, you'll get different results. And then you can also, another trick that I've learned was when you're done washing your bees, dump them all in a container, and then when you're done doing your washes, take that container and wash it again, and see the mites you get out of it. I don't know if folks are familiar with Medhat Nasser. He's a Canadian entomologist. He's big time in Varroa research, and he a peer of mine, good friend here, was involved in an Apivar test trial a few years back, and Medhat was their key guy, and taught us a bunch of tricks about that. I will say, I do use oxalic acid, but I have to be honest with the newbies in my group that have just a handful of hives. I have them use Apivar. I think Apivar is probably the best commercial product out there. I've had great success with it. The newbies have, well, I shouldn't say newbies, but the folks in my bee group that are, just few hives have great success with it. My problem is I shouldn't say problem. It's not cost effective for me. It's, you're talking, I don't know what it is now, but it's at least $10 a hive to treat. And when you have many hives, that adds up quickly. I will say, although I recommend Apivar to the folks, if you do use Apivar, you got to go 10 weeks, even though the label says 6 weeks. That's what it's registered for in the US, part of the whole regulation, process. Everywhere else in the world, it's registered for, I think, 8 or 10 weeks. And in the trial that, my cohort did, he did not see, he saw mite drops continuing up, didn't level off in week 9. So you'll hear a lot of mixed reviews on Apivar, and I've seen it locally with folks that weren't necessarily affiliated in my group that were following the directions. And, a neighbor of theirs was affiliated with me, and, they compared results, and one was, very successful the winter, other one was not. And it was because of the only 6 weeks. So if you're going to use Apivar, it works, but you got to go 10 weeks.
Okay, so there's a couple of questions that are probably tied more to our geography. So what I'm going to do is ask, I see Ken Cobb's still on and Jim's still on, Gordon's still on, several of us. So Rob, I'll ask you the question, but don't be surprised if somebody helps, with the
Sure.
local. So it says, mentioned not having a screen bottom board. Can you provide a recommendation for a winter setup, inner cover, top cover, etc., for North Carolina Piedmont?
To me, I mean, obviously I don't have any experience, but the first thing that, to control moisture, I'm assuming moisture is a big issue. And that's what drives a lot of people to ventilate. And the principles that I follow that I think would probably work is, if the hive can keep warm, the warm air holds moisture, and condensation is not an issue. The other thing that, as a safety net, like I do on my hives, is to make sure your highest insulated value is above on the top. I'm not a fan of inner covers. Inner covers give a dead space, especially with ventilation. It creates that cool spot that causes ventilation. What I do is, with a lot of folks I come across a lot, not surprisingly, a lot of folks come to our B group that already have wooden hives and stuff. And, once again, you got to do what you got to do with what you have. And I'll recommend that they do basically a bee cozy, and make a polystyrene box to put around it, or wrap, do something to insulate it. But the thing is, without being able to guarantee that the bees are going to be able to keep warm, you want to have some secondary backup just in case there is condensation. My first advice to everybody is no ventilation, and try to deal with the condensation if it does happen. And what I have the folks do is basically take and put an extra honey super or something right on top of their brood nest, and just pack it full of newspapers, and insulate that, keep that all under the insulation box and whatever. And that newspaper will absorb a tremendous amount of water if you do have condensation. So the bees can continue to try to stay warm, and even if there is condensation, you will absorb it with the newspaper. Very much similar to like the Warray of quilt box. But I found that using sawdust and other types of media it's a mess in the spring to try and deal with. Newspapers, I can just pull bundles out and put bundles in.
Okay. Yeah, there was a question about a feeding shim topped with a quilt box. So you kind of addressed the quilt box, or your version of it.
Yeah.
And then you also addressed insulation on top. Your highest R factor, on the top.
Right.
Okay, and I think we've touched on Jim, Gordon, Ken, the one about the winter setup for Piedmont, North Carolina. Did you guys have any additional comments on that?
I can tell you what I do, or what I've done, and what I'm going to do. I mean, so I normally put a medium box, sometimes a deep box, or whatever I have, and I'll take a burlap bag and I fill that with cedar chips, and I just put that right on top of my inner cover. So I'm just trying to keep the lid warm.
Yep.
And that's, that's where you're losing 25% of your heat through the top. This year I'm doing something different because I'm just out of medium boxes. All my medium boxes have either bees in them, or they've got, a comb in them. So just this weekend, I made 19 shims, some of them 2 inches and some of them 3 inches thick, because I just wasn't quite sure which is gonna work better. And I bought some of the 2-inch polystyrene, which is R10. And, Rob had mentioned on our Slack channel that you can use a table saw to cut that. I was wondering how to cut that cleanly, and that works like a charm. So I've got, all my pieces of polystyrene ready to go in there. I've also got the what's it called? The foam spray that you can fill in the cracks around it. I don't know if that's just more trouble and it's worth, maybe it's gonna create too much of a mess, so I don't know about that. But the one thing that I have, maybe you could answer this, Rob, is I'm thinking, there's still a crack around the inner cover there. There's a seam. And there might be a tape that wouldn't be too expensive. I use duct tape that is non-residue, low residue, and it's pretty expensive. And, just doing one seam is 6 foot of tape.
Yeah.
So it'd be good to have a tape that is not going to tear the paint off of the hive. It's a low residue that would cover well. I don't know if there's something out there besides what I'm using.
Yeah, I don't have any input for you there. I use a lot of metal duct tape, which seems counterproductive because metal tends to transmit heat easier. But the one thing I will throw out there to folks considering using polystyrene is, if you leave it to where if you're putting it on top of an inner cover or something where the bees can't get to it, that it's not a problem. But like when I put my 2-inch polystyrene board right on top of the shim, and as you can see, the shim is actually protected too. The bees will chew through the pink and the blue polystyrene that you get in the big box stores. They'll chew through it like butter. So you got to prevent them from doing that. Whereas the polystyrene hives, if you've never seen them, it is like super dense. They can't, well, I shouldn't say they can. I've actually had hives that chew through them, but for the most part, they don't chew through them. And so you need to protect any exposed that they can get to. And what I do, when I put the 2-inch, board across the top of here is I've tried many things, between, using spray glue and garbage bags. And I've even done those silverized, emergency blankets you can get, thinking maybe that would reflect some of the heat back down to them. It turns out they just chewed the silver off the plastic. What I do now, because it's free and works well, is I just take my feed bags from my chickens and I just cut a square of that plasticized feed bags we get now, and I just glue that to the polystyrene and put that down, and so they can't chew through it. Yeah, some of the experiments I did early on, and it was like, they they chewed through that stuff like crazy. So just beware of that.
Yeah, I've experienced that as well. And so like over top of the hole in the inner cover, I put just a little piece of plastic from like a spinach container, just cut out a little square and put that over. I've heard that if you paint the polystyrene, they won't chew it. But, haven't.
Yeah, that's, if painting the polystyrene board is anything like painting the polystyrene beehives, it's a chore, because the paint just doesn't want to stick to the polystyrene and just basically puddles. And
Okay.
I've actually come to the point now where my hives, I actually use an air sprayer, because by brush, it's like, I know I'm exaggerating, but it's like it takes 10 coats before you finally get it covered the way it wants to pool. But yeah, maybe that's very well could be. I've not to get it off on a tangent, but I've done yellow jacket removals from houses, and just to share a short story, I had a woman call me and said my wall is moving, and and I get there, and the yellow jackets had moved into the wall, and well, she had saw moisture running down the outside too, right? So it's like, and they had chewed through the sheetrock and the paper on the sheetrock, but they couldn't they didn't or couldn't chew through the layer of paint on the wall. So it was the wall, you could touch it. It was just the paint was left, and you could see it moving. So yeah, I wouldn't doubt that depending on the paint, that they can't chew through it.
Okay, so there's a question about using unbleached muslin under the quilt box. Or even on the polystyrene.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, that's fine. It's very much what like the Warray box, you know, and they use you know, burlap.
Yeah, I use
Um,
burlap, get cheap burlap from Agri Supply.
yeah, yeah. You just got to watch. I mean, a lot of that. I mean, I don't know. A lot of the burlap bags and stuff these days are treated with chemicals for insects and stuff. I know I haven't been using it, but I know some of the guys around here, you know, they search for what is it, free trade coffee, I guess, comes in burlap that's untreated. But yeah, you know, I think any kind of material that's you know, you think is safe is fine. It lets the moisture go through, you know, and keeps the bees from the bee will propolize it up, but that's not necessarily a problem.
I've had problems with him chewing through the burlap too.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and one time it was during a robbing situation. The robbing bees tried to get out the top that I had the burlap.
Oh, you know what? Now that you mentioned, it's been a while, but that's why the Warray, the procedure was to basically take the burlap and make
Starch it.
a starch. Yeah, I was gonna say a
starch it.
flour paste. That's what I did. Yeah.
It makes it stiff and easier to put in place once it's all dry and smooth.
Yeah, it does.
Okay, so you know we'll keep asking questions as long as you're willing to talk. So
Oh,
it-
I'm willing to talk. I mean, it's not a problem.
Right. So I don't see any new questions on chat. Is there anyone else have something?
Yeah, do you have plans for that bottom board that you could give them?
Yeah, I do actually. But I have to, you know, preface that with you'll have to adjust them for a wooden Langstroth, their size for the BMAX, which is, you know, I mean, the inside dimensions are the same, for from the Langstroth standpoint, but the outside dimensions are like 21 by 17 3/4. But yeah, I can share with you the plans I have. Not a problem.
Yeah, that would be great. I guess the other thing is, you know, can we share the video? You know, I'm sure we can share it with the club, right? But would it be all right to share it outside the club?
Yeah, I mean, you know, I'm not like anything. I love, you know,
Yeah.
it's all about sharing knowledge, and you know, I'm not opposed to sharing with anybody. Once again, I'm just, you know, make it clear that I'm not saying that what I'm doing is right, but I'm willing to share what I'm doing, and you can, you know, people can decide for themselves.
Yeah, I was thinking all the people in our Slack channel that I couldn't invite.
Yeah. So a couple of comments. Great presentation. Many thanks. And then thank you. Great presentation. It makes me think. So I
Well,
think
that's good.
Yeah.
That's my intent of doing this, right? Is not to browbeat people into agreeing with me or doing what I do, but just sit back and think about what you're doing and you know, adjust accordingly, because it makes everybody a better beekeeper.
Excellent. Well, Rob, really appreciate you speaking to our club tonight.
Not a problem.
Jim, did you have anything else to wrap up?
No, just thanks for sharing. There's no door prizes tonight, obviously. So, but next month we'll be back at the what's it, the Commons building,
Commons.
and we'll be having our potluck. So think about what you want to bring.
So Rob, if you want to come down, we'll feed you. It might be a little bit of a drive.
Yeah, no, and yeah, some one of these days, because I have friends that are always I've made it to Florida a couple times for some beekeeping groups, and I do have some friends in North Carolina. I think you guys are pretty close to Randolph County, right?
East of Randolph. You know,
Yeah, I have a good friend and I think it's Sophie or Sophia or something.
Yeah. Yeah.
someday maybe I'll stop by.
We'll see if we can't get you an invite to speak at one of the state conferences. Give you an excuse to come down.
Yeah. I don't know if I'm worthy of that though.
Hey, I don't know. I saw a lot of good information. Well,
Yeah.
Rob, really appreciate it.
Great. Really enjoyed it, guys. And, hope we can talk soon again sometime.
And I'll reach out to you in a few days.
Okay. So you
Thank
guys
you.
recorded this? I guess,
Yes.
well, Jim will, if you share with folks, then I can share it with some of the folks from IB group too. So that'd be good. Thank you.
I'll make sure you get the link.
Great.
Yay.
All right, everyone. Thank you and enjoy the rest of your evening.
Good night,
Thank you.
everyone.